Hey folks, before the video starts, please leave a like and subscribe to cheer me up. Make sure you are relaxed and enjoy today's stories. I was assigned to decode a strange signal from space. The message was a warning. So this happened just a few months ago, and I still can't wrap my head around it. I'm not some big shot scientist or anything, just a regular guy with a degree in computer science and a fascination with space. I work as a contractor for various tech companies, mostly doing coding and data analysis. Sometimes though, I get pulled into weird projects because of my background in signal processing. That's how I ended up getting involved in something that still keeps me up at night. It all started when I received a call from an old professor of mine, Dr. Patterson, a guy I hadn't spoken to in years. He was a big name in astrophysics, the kind of guy you'd see on documentaries talking about black holes and alien life. Anyway, he sounded different this time, almost nervous, which was unlike him. He asked me if I was free to take on a highly confidential project. I've done work for him before, but this time he was really vague about what it involved. I didn't have much going on at the time, so I said yes. I wish I hadn't. A couple of days later, I received an encrypted file on my email with a note that just said, "Decode ASAP, urgent." There were no details, no explanations, just that. It was strange, but not entirely out of character for Dr. Patterson, who was notorious for his secrecy. The file itself was a mess of data, just a massive jumble of ones and zeros. Binary code, sure, but it didn't follow any standard format. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before. I spent hours trying to make sense of it. The code was dense, complex, but I started to notice patterns, repeating sequences that seemed almost deliberate. I don't know how to explain it, but it felt like this wasn't just a random signal. It was trying to say something. After what felt like an eternity, I managed to decode the first part. And that's when things started to get weird. The decoded message was simple, but it made my stomach drop. Help us. Now, I've seen weird stuff before, especially working with data from space. Signals get distorted, random noise gets interpreted as patterns. It's all part of the job. But this was different. There was something about the way it was structured, something that felt intentional. I tried to tell myself it was just a coincidence, maybe a natural phenomenon we hadn't encountered before. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I called Dr. Patterson immediately, but he didn't pick up. Instead, I got a text from him, which was even more unsettling. "Don't discuss this with anyone. Keep decoding." That's when I realized I was in over my head, but I couldn't just walk away. I had to know what this was, so I kept working on it. Sleepless nights spent staring at my computer screen, decrypting layer after layer of data. The further I got, the more uneasy I felt. The messages were getting clearer, more coherent, and they weren't just cries for help. They were warnings. One phrase kept repeating over and over, like it was trying to hammer the point home. "It's coming. You are not prepared." At this point, I was too deep to back out, but I was also scared out of my mind. I knew I should tell someone, anyone, but Dr. Patterson's warning kept echoing in my head. I didn't know who to trust, and honestly, I wasn't even sure if anyone would believe me. I wasn't sure I believed it myself. As I continued to decode the signal, I started noticing other things too. Strange things. Electronics in my apartment would malfunction at odd times. My phone would glitch out. The TV would turn on by itself. and my computer would freeze up, showing random static for a few seconds before going back to normal. I even started hearing faint noises like a low hum or a distant whisper, especially when I was working on the signal late at night. I tried to tell myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but it didn't help. Then, one night, I was jolted awake by a loud bang. It sounded like it came from the hallway outside my apartment. I grabbed my phone and crept to the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I peeked through the peephole, but there was no one there. I almost convinced myself it was nothing, just a random noise. But then I saw it. A small folded piece of paper slipped under my door. I picked it up, my hands trembling. The note was short, written in a messy, almost frantic scrawl. "Stop decoding. They're listening." That's when I realized that whatever I had gotten myself into, it was much bigger and much more dangerous than I had imagined. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. After finding that note, I sat on the edge of my bed, clutching it in my hand, my mind racing. Who had left it? How did they know what I was working on? And more importantly, what did they mean by "they're listening"? My apartment suddenly felt small, suffocating. Every shadow seemed to shift. Every creak in the walls felt like a footstep approaching. I knew I had to make a decision. Either I keep going, finish decoding the signal, or I stop and try to forget all about this. But the thing is, I've never been good at leaving things unfinished, especially when they're wrapped in this kind of mystery. And maybe, just maybe, I was too curious for my own good. The next morning, I decided to get out of the apartment. I needed some fresh air, a break from the computer, from the growing paranoia. I grabbed my laptop, shoved it into my backpack, and headed to a local cafe. It was one of those small places, a bit off the beaten path, where you could sit for hours without anyone bothering you. I figured it was the safest place to keep working, somewhere public, where I wouldn't be alone. As I sat down and opened my laptop, I noticed a man at the far end of the cafe. He was dressed in a black suit, which was odd considering the casual vibe of the place. He looked out of place, but I didn't think much of it at first. I was more focused on the data in front of me, the signal, the damn signal that had been eating away at me for days. The more I decoded, the more I started to piece together a story, or at least that's what it seemed like. The messages were fragmented, but there was a definite narrative to them. They spoke of a civilization, advanced, far beyond our own. They had been watching us, studying us from a distance, but something had gone wrong. They were in danger. No, they were dying, and whatever was killing them, it was coming for us next. I don't know how to describe the feeling I got as I read those words. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was deeper, more primal, like something had reached inside me and twisted my insides into a knot. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the screen, even though I knew I probably should have. The warning was getting more desperate, more insistent. Prepare. It's closer than you think. I was so absorbed in the decoding that I almost didn't notice the man in the black suit had moved. He was closer now, just a few tables away, sitting directly across from me. He was staring. No, more like glaring at me. His expression was blank, almost inhuman, and his eyes, they didn't blink, not once. It was like he was waiting for something. I tried to ignore him, focusing on my work, but it was impossible. He was too close, too present. My hand started to tremble on the keyboard. I told myself it was just a coincidence, that I was being paranoid because of everything that had happened. But then my laptop screen flickered. just for a moment, and I could swear I saw something. A flash of static, a distorted face in the pixels, before it went back to normal. My heart pounded in my chest as I quickly shut the laptop. I needed to get out of there. I grabbed my backpack and made for the door, but as I passed the man in the black suit, he spoke. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but it stopped me cold. "Stop, or they'll stop you." I didn't respond. I didn't even look at him. I just kept walking, my mind reeling. Who the hell was he? How did he know what I was working on? And what did he mean by, "They'll stop you"? By the time I got back to my apartment, I was a mess. I felt like I was being watched, followed even, but when I checked behind me, the street was empty. Still, the feeling didn't go away. It clung to me like a second skin, making my every move feel sluggish, weighed down by an invisible force. Inside, I double-locked the door and pulled the curtains shut. The laptop was still in my bag, but I couldn't bring myself to open it again. Not yet. Instead, I slumped onto the couch, my mind buzzing with 1,000 thoughts, none of them comforting. And then, as I sat there in the dark, my phone buzzed. I almost didn't check it, afraid of what I might see, but curiosity got the better of me. It was a message from an unknown number. It read, "Last warning. Destroy the data." My hand shook as I read it over and over, trying to make sense of it. Destroy the data. I didn't even know if that was possible. The signal, the message, it was out there, somewhere in space. I was just decoding it. What good would it do to destroy my copy? But then the phone buzzed again, and this time, it was a picture. My blood ran cold as I stared at it. It was a photo of me, taken from just outside my apartment window, just moments ago. The angle was perfect, capturing the fear on my face as I sat there, clutching my phone. I scrambled off the couch, my heart thudding in my chest, and ran to the window. I yanked the curtains open, but there was nothing there. No one. Just the empty street, bathed in the dim orange glow of the streetlights. But I knew, somehow, that they were out there, watching, waiting. And I realized, in that moment, that I had no idea what I was dealing with. I was in way over my head, and I wasn't sure if there was any way out. After that photo, everything changed. The paranoia that had been building inside me finally boiled over into full-blown fear. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched every minute of every day. The silence of my apartment became oppressive, and even the smallest sound, a creak in the floorboards, the hum of the fridge, set my nerves on edge. I started avoiding windows, convinced that someone was out there, just beyond my view, tracking my every move. For the next few days, I tried to distract myself by throwing myself into work, anything to keep my mind off the signal. But it was no use. The message was like a hook lodged deep in my brain, impossible to ignore. I kept thinking about that warning. Last warning, destroy the data. But how could I? I didn't even know who these people were, or what they wanted. And more importantly, I didn't know if I could trust them. What if destroying the data was exactly what they wanted, to keep the truth hidden? Despite my better judgment, I found myself returning to the signal. I didn't want to, but it was like an itch I couldn't scratch. I needed to know what the rest of the message said, needed to understand what was so important that someone was willing to threaten me to keep it secret. So one night, when I couldn't take it anymore, I opened my laptop again and resumed decoding. The data was even more complex now, as if the signal was trying to protect itself. But I pressed on, I don't know how long I worked. Hours at least, maybe longer. Time seemed to blur, and all that existed was the code and the growing sense of dread that came with every new fragment I decoded. And then, just as I was starting to make sense of another part of the message, my phone rang. The sudden noise jolted me out of my concentration, sending my heart into overdrive. I almost didn't answer it, but something told me I should. Maybe it was Dr. Patterson finally calling me back, but it wasn't him. When I answered, there was only silence on the other end. I strained to hear anything, breathing, background noise, anything, but it was like the line was dead. I was about to hang up when a voice cut through the silence. It was distorted, robotic, like it was being filtered through layers of static. Leave. Now. Before I could respond, the call ended, leaving me with nothing but the dial tone and a growing sense of panic. I stared at my phone, my hands trembling. This wasn't just a warning anymore. It was a command, and whoever was behind it was done playing games. I packed up my laptop and started for the door, not sure where I was going, just knowing that I couldn't stay in my apartment any longer. But as I reached for the doorknob, there was a knock, 3 sharp raps that echoed through the quiet of the room. I froze. No one ever visited me, especially not this late. The knock came again, louder this time, more insistent. My heart raced as I debated whether to open the door or pretend I wasn't home. But deep down, I knew that whoever was out there wasn't going to just go away. Taking a deep breath, I slowly cracked the door open, keeping the chain lock in place. Standing in the dim hallway was a man I didn't recognize. He wasn't like the guy in the black suit from the cafe. This one was different. He looked ordinary, almost too ordinary, like he was trying too hard to blend in. Brown jacket, jeans, nondescript baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He could have been anyone, and maybe that was the point. "Can I help you?" My voice came out shakier than I intended. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, as if assessing me, before speaking in a low, calm tone. "You need to come with me." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Why? Who are you?" He didn't respond, just looked past me into the apartment, his eyes narrowing. "It's not safe here. They know where you are. You need to leave. Now." My mind raced. I didn't know who this guy was, or if I could trust him, but something about the way he said "they" made my blood run cold. I hesitated, glancing back at my laptop on the table, the decoded message still incomplete. But before I could decide what to do, the man reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device, no bigger than a smartphone. "Trust me," he said, his voice low but urgent. "If you don't come with me, you won't make it through the night." There was something in his eyes, a look that told me he wasn't lying, that whatever danger I was in, it was very real. My thoughts were a jumbled mess, but I knew I couldn't stay there, not if what he was saying was true. Reluctantly, I undid the chain and stepped into the hallway, the man quickly ushering me out the door. As we made our way down the stairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was the last time I'd ever see my apartment. Something was going to happen, something I couldn't control or predict. We exited the building and stepped into the cool night air. The street was eerily quiet, and I half expected to see black cars waiting to whisk us away. But the man led me to an old beat-up sedan parked a block away. He opened the passenger door and motioned for me to get in. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Somewhere safe," he replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. I got in, my heart pounding as the man started the car and pulled away from the curb. As we drove through the deserted streets, I couldn't help but glance at him out of the corner of my eye, trying to gauge who he was and why he was helping me. But he kept his focus on the road, his expression unreadable. We drove in silence for what felt like an eternity, the city lights blurring into a kaleidoscope of colors as we sped through the night. I had no idea where we were going or what would happen when we got there. All I knew was that I was running out of options and time. Eventually, the man turned off the main road and onto a narrow, unmarked path that led into a wooded area. The trees loomed over us, casting long, eerie shadows in the headlights. My anxiety spiked. This didn't feel safe. It felt like we were driving straight into a trap. "Where are we?" I asked, my voice cracking under the strain of fear. "Just a little further," the man said, his tone calm but firm. "You'll be safe soon." I wanted to believe him, but every instinct in my body screamed that something was wrong. The woods closed in around us, the darkness growing thicker with each passing moment. I couldn't see anything beyond the narrow beam of the car's headlights, and that only heightened my sense of dread. Finally, the man pulled the car to a stop in front of a small, run-down cabin, barely visible in the darkness. It looked abandoned, like no one had set foot in it for years. The windows were boarded up, and the roof sagged under the weight of time and neglect. This was supposed to be the safe place. "Stay here," he said, cutting the engine and getting out of the car. I watched as he walked up to the cabin, producing a key from his pocket and unlocking the door. He disappeared inside, leaving me alone in the car, surrounded by the oppressive silence of the forest. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and I had to fight the urge to jump out and run. A few minutes later, he returned, gesturing for me to follow him inside. Reluctantly, I got out of the car, my legs feeling like lead as I approached the cabin. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and rotting wood, and the only sounds were the distant rustling of leaves and the occasional creak of the trees in the wind. As soon as I stepped inside, the man shut the door behind me, locking it with a heavy bolt. The interior of the cabin was as run down as the outside, dusty furniture, peeling wallpaper, and a musty smell that clung to everything. But there was something else, too. Something I couldn't quite put my finger on. A feeling, a presence, like the walls themselves were watching me. "There's a room in the back," the man said, nodding towards a door at the far end of the cabin. "You can rest there. I need to take care of something first." Before I could ask what he meant, he disappeared into another part of the cabin, leaving me alone in the dimly lit room. The atmosphere was suffocating, and I could feel the walls closing in on me, the weight of everything that had happened pressing down like a heavy blanket. I made my way to the back room, every step echoing in the silence. The door creaked as I pushed it open, revealing a small windowless space with nothing but a bed and a rickety nightstand. It felt like a prison cell, a place where you'd be forgotten if you weren't careful. Exhausted, I collapsed onto the bed, my mind racing. Who was this man? Why had he brought me here? And most importantly, what was I supposed to do now? The cabin felt like a dead end, a place where I'd be trapped forever if I didn't figure out what was going on. As I lay there, trying to make sense of everything, I heard it. A faint sound, barely audible at first, but growing louder. It was a low, droning hum, like the buzz of an old television set left on with no signal. But this sound was different, more sinister, like it was coming from somewhere deep within the earth. I sat up, straining to hear where it was coming from. The hum seemed to vibrate through the walls, the floor, even the air around me. It was almost as if the cabin itself was resonating with the sound, amplifying it until it became impossible to ignore. And then I realized the sound was coming from beneath the floorboards. My heart pounded in my chest as I stood up, the hum growing louder with every passing second. I had to know what it was, had to find out if it was connected to the signal somehow. But as I reached down to touch the floorboards, I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around to see the man standing in the doorway, his face expressionless, but his eyes were filled with something dark, something I couldn't quite place. Fear, anger, or maybe something worse. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice cold and distant. Before I could respond, the hum suddenly intensified, shaking the entire cabin. The lights flickered, and I felt a deep, bone-chilling cold wash over me. It was like the air itself was freezing, turning solid around me, trapping me in place. And then, without warning, the floorboards beneath my feet gave way, and I was plunged into darkness. The fall felt endless. I tumbled through the darkness, the world spinning around me, and for a moment, I wasn't sure if I was falling down or up. The air rushed past me, cold and damp, and I could feel the pressure building in my ears, like I was descending deep underwater. My hands clawed at the nothingness, desperately searching for something to grab onto, but there was only the void. Just when I thought I would keep falling forever, I hit the ground with a jarring thud. Pain shot through my body as I lay there, gasping for breath, trying to get my bearings. The darkness was absolute, pressing in on me from all sides, and the only sound was the ragged gasp of my own breath. I tried to stand, but my legs felt weak, like they didn't belong to me anymore. Slowly, my eyes began to adjust to the darkness. I could just make out the faintest of glows emanating from somewhere ahead, a sickly, pale light that seemed to pulse like a dying heartbeat. I forced myself to move, crawling towards the light, my hands scraping against cold, uneven stone. As I got closer, the light grew brighter, revealing my surroundings. I was in a tunnel, the walls rough and jagged, as if they were being carved out of the earth by something with no regard for symmetry or design. The air was thick with the smell of damp soil and something else, something metallic and acrid that made my stomach turn. I struggled to my feet, leaning against the wall for support, and started to walk towards the light. My footsteps echoed in the confined space, each one sounding impossibly loud. I didn't know where I was going or what I would find, but I knew there was no turning back. Whatever this place was, it was connected to the signal. I could feel it in my bones, like a deep, unsettling vibration that resonated with the very core of my being. The tunnel twisted and turned, leading me deeper underground. The light grew stronger, illuminating the path ahead with an eerie, unnatural glow. And then, as I rounded a corner, I saw it, a doorway, ancient and covered in symbols that I couldn't begin to understand. The door itself was slightly ajar, the light spilling out from the crack, casting long shadows on the stone floor. I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to turn back, to run, but I couldn't. I was drawn to that door, pulled by something I couldn't explain. With trembling hands, I pushed it open and stepped inside. The room beyond was massive, like a cavern carved out of the earth itself. The walls, were lined with strange machines, ancient, yet somehow still functional, their surfaces covered in dust and grime. The light I had seen was coming from a large central device, something that looked like a combination of an altar and a control panel. It hummed with a low, resonant frequency, the same sound I had heard before the floor gave way. But what caught my attention wasn't the machinery. It was what lay in the center of the room, illuminated by the pale light, a large, glass-like cylinder filled with a thick, viscous liquid, and inside that cylinder, something was floating, something that looked almost human but was horribly wrong. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and its eyes, they were wide open, staring straight ahead with an expression of pure, unfiltered terror. The thing's mouth was twisted into a silent scream, and its limbs were contorted as if frozen in the throes of some unimaginable agony. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat, as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing, but there was no sense to be made. This thing, this abomination, was nothing that should exist in the real world. It was like a nightmare made flesh, something that belonged in the darkest corners of the human mind, not in a place like this. And then, as I stood there, transfixed by the horror in front of me, the machines around the room suddenly came to life. Lights blinked on, casting the room in a harsh, sterile glow, and the humming grew louder, more intense. The cylinder began to vibrate, and the liquid inside started to bubble and churn. I wanted to run, to get as far away from that place as possible, but my feet wouldn't move. It was like I was rooted to the spot, forced to watch as the cylinder's contents were stirred into a frenzy. The thing inside twitched, its eyes rolling back in its head, and for a moment I thought it was going to wake up. Then, without warning, the liquid inside the cylinder drained away, leaving the creature suspended in the air. It convulsed, its limbs flailing as if it was being electrocuted, and a low, guttural moan filled the room, a sound that was both inhuman and utterly wretched. That's when I saw it. Behind the cylinder, on the wall, there was a massive screen filled with rows upon rows of data. The signal. It was the signal I had been decoding, running in real time, the text scrolling across the screen too fast for me to read. And then, the message froze, the letters glowing bright white against the black background. My heart skipped a beat as I read the words that appeared on the screen. You were warned. Now you will see. Before I could react, the room was filled with a blinding light, so intense that I had to shield my eyes. The hum reached a deafening pitch, vibrating through my bones, and the creature in the cylinder let out a final blood-curdling scream before the light consumed everything. I don't remember what happened next. The world dissolved into chaos, a maelstrom of noise and light and pain. I felt like I was being torn apart, every atom of my being ripped from the fabric of reality. And then, nothing. I woke up on the cold stone floor, my body aching all over. The light was gone, and the room was dark, silent. The machines were dead, their lights extinguished, and the cylinder, it was empty. Whatever had been inside, it was gone, leaving only a dark stain on the glass. I staggered to my feet, my head spinning. The screen was still on, but the message had changed. Now, it simply read, "It is coming." I didn't wait to find out what it was. I ran. I don't know how I found my way out of the tunnels, don't know how long I stumbled through the darkness, but eventually I emerged into the cold night air, gasping for breath. The cabin was gone, replaced by an empty clearing in the woods. as if it had never been there at all. But as I stood there, shaking and trying to make sense of what had happened, I realized something. I could still hear the hum, faint but unmistakable, vibrating in the back of my mind, and with it came the chilling realization that whatever I had uncovered, whatever I had unleashed, it wasn't over. It was just beginning. The walk back to civilization felt like a fever dream. My legs carried me forward, but my mind was somewhere else, stuck in that dark room with the machines, the creature, and the terrible warning. The hum never left me, a constant low vibration that resonated deep within my skull, like a drumbeat that I couldn't shake. When I finally stumbled back into town, it was just before dawn. The streets were empty, the world still shrouded in darkness. I must have looked like a madman, dirty, disheveled, and wide-eyed with fear. But I didn't care. I had to find a place to hide, to think. But where could I go? I had no idea who to trust anymore. Eventually, I found myself outside a run-down motel on the edge of town. It was the kind of place where no one asked questions, where anonymity was guaranteed. I paid for a room in cash, not bothering to check if the clerk recognized the panic in my eyes. I just needed to be somewhere, with 4 walls and a door that locked. Inside the room, I collapsed onto the bed, my mind racing, trying to piece together everything that had happened. The signal, the warnings, the man in the black suit, the creature in the cylinder. It all felt like fragments of a nightmare, disjointed and incomprehensible. But I knew one thing for sure. Whatever I had been decoding, whatever that signal was, it wasn't just some random transmission from deep space. It was a message, and now that I had unlocked it, something had been set in motion, something that couldn't be stopped. I took out my laptop, the one I had clung to throughout this entire ordeal. I didn't want to open it, didn't want to see what might be waiting for me on the other side of the screen, but I had to know. I had to finish what I started. The laptop powered up with a soft hum, so similar to the one I now heard constantly. It made my skin crawl. The screen flickered to life, and I was greeted with the lost remnants of the decoded message. It was still there, the text frozen on the screen, but now there was something else. A single file had appeared on my desktop, the name of which sent a shiver down my spine. finalwarning.exe. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the trackpad. Every part of me screamed not to open it, to shut the laptop and walk away, but I couldn't. It was as if the file was pulling me in, demanding to be acknowledged. With a deep breath, I clicked on it. The screen went black for a moment, and then, slowly, text began to appear, line by line, as if someone, or something, was typing it out in real time. You have seen what was hidden. You have heard our call. Now, you will understand. The message disappeared, replaced by a new one, and as I read it, my blood ran cold. We were the last of our kind. Our world was consumed, destroyed by what lies beyond. We tried to warn you, to prepare you for what is coming, but it is too late. It has found you. The screen flickered again, and an image appeared. It was a grainy black and white photo, one that looked like it had been taken decades ago. But it wasn't the image itself that terrified me. It was what it depicted. The same creature I'd seen in the cylinder, or something like it, standing in the middle of a barren landscape. Behind it, the sky was filled with darkness, a roiling mass of shadow that seemed to stretch out like tendrils, consuming everything in its path. The text resumed, each word hitting me like a punch to the gut. It devours, it consumes, It will not stop until all that exists is silence. We fail to contain it. Now, you will face it too. The screen flashed one last time, and the final message appeared, written in bold, stark letters. Run. Before I could react, the laptop shut off, the screen going black and leaving me staring at my own horrified reflection. The hum in my head intensified, becoming a throbbing pulse that drowned out all rational thought. I was frozen in place, my mind grappling with the enormity of what I had just learned. But then, something broke through the haze. A noise from outside the motel room. It was faint, barely audible, but it was there. A low, grinding sound, like metal being dragged across pavement. My breath caught in my throat as I slowly turned towards the door. The noise grew louder, closer. I could hear it now. The rhythmic thud of something heavy being pulled across the ground, accompanied by a scraping that set my teeth on edge. I stood up, my body moving on autopilot, and backed away from the door, my heart racing. Whatever was making that noise, it was just outside. I could feel it, a presence that radiated cold, empty malice. The door rattled slightly, as if something on the other side was testing it, probing for weakness. I had nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The hum in my head reached a fever pitch, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I clutched my head, trying to block it out, but it was useless. It was inside me, just as much as it was outside. The door creaked, the knob slowly turning. My heart felt like it would burst out of my chest. I backed into the corner of the room, pressing myself against the wall, as if I could somehow melt into it, disappear. The door opened with a low groan, and the cold air rushed in, carrying with it the smell of decay and something else, something ancient and wrong. I couldn't see it yet, whatever was out there, but I knew it was coming for me. I closed my eyes, bracing for the inevitable. But just before the darkness could claim me, I heard a voice, faint and distant, cutting through the noise in my head. Run. It was a whisper, a final plea from whatever had sent the signal, from whatever remnants of that lost civilization were still out there, somewhere in the void. And for some reason, it gave me the strength to move. I bolted from the corner, grabbing the laptop and rushing out the back window of the motel room, just as the door fully opened. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just ran, as fast as my legs would carry me, into the cold, pre-dawn light. The hum was still there, but it was fading, growing distant as I put more ground between myself and that thing. I don't know how far I ran, or how long it took, but eventually, I found myself on the edge of the town, the sun just beginning to rise. I collapsed onto the pavement, gasping for breath, my mind still reeling from everything that had happened. I looked back, half expecting to see the motel consumed by darkness, but there was nothing there, just the empty street, silent and still. But I knew that it wasn't over. The signal, the warning, it was all real, and whatever was coming, it was still out there. I had to keep moving, keep running, because it would never stop hunting me. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't only hunting me. I paid to view a secret, dark web live stream. What I saw is happening now, outside my window. So this is going to sound weird, but I guess that's the whole point of why I'm posting this. If any of you have spent more than a few nights down the YouTube rabbit hole, you've probably stumbled across a few videos talking about the dark web. You know, the ones with the clickbait titles like top 5 creepiest things found on the dark web, or why you should never visit the dark web. Most of those videos are just fluff, right? They recycle the same stories over and over again. Hitmen for hire, red rooms, stolen credit cards, and yeah, it's usually the kind of stuff that sounds more like urban legends than reality. I'm not the kind of person who scares easily. Horror movies are my jam, and I've always been fascinated by what lies beyond the surface of the internet. So, naturally, after watching one too many of those YouTube videos, my curiosity got the better of me. I decided to explore the dark web myself. Now, before you start judging, let me explain. I wasn't planning on doing anything illegal. I wasn't looking to hire a hitman, or buy drugs, or anything crazy like that. I just wanted to see if there was anything more to it than the usual stories. So after a bit of Googling, I downloaded Tor and started digging. At first, it was exactly what you'd expect. Boring forums, sketchy marketplaces, and a lot of sites that were either down or full of broken links. I almost gave up after the first hour. But then, just as I was about to call it a night, I found something that caught my eye. It was a link buried deep in a forum thread titled The Forbidden Show. The description was vague, just a couple of sentences. Exclusive, limited access livestream. You won't find this anywhere else. Click at your own risk. Yeah, I know. It screamed trap, or at the very least scam. But by that point, I was too invested to back out. It felt like I was on the verge of discovering something truly hidden. Something that wasn't just another tall tale spun for internet fame. When I clicked the link, I was taken to a pitch-black web page with nothing but a single red button in the center labeled Enter. Beneath the button was a disclaimer in small, barely readable text. It said something like, by clicking, you agree to the terms. No refunds, no escape. Again, probably a scam, right? But I was too deep down the rabbit hole to care. So I clicked it. Immediately, I was prompted to pay in Bitcoin. It wasn't a small amount either, enough that I hesitated for a good minute, wondering if I was making a huge mistake. But curiosity got the better of me, and I made the payment. After a few seconds, the screen flashed, and I was redirected to a new page. There was a countdown timer ticking down from 10 minutes, and underneath, a chat box that was already active with other users. The messages flying by were strange, a mix of different languages and cryptic phrases like, "Are you ready?" and "It's almost time." The whole thing felt off. It was like I had walked into a room I wasn't supposed to be in, but there was no turning back now. As the countdown hit 0, the screen went dark. For a few seconds, I thought maybe I'd been scammed after all. But then, the livestream started. At first, it was just static, gray and white noise flickering on the screen. But slowly, an image began to form. It was a room, dimly lit, with a single chair placed in the center. The camera was static, aimed directly at the chair. I waited, heart pounding in my chest, for something to happen. But for the longest time, nothing did. Then almost imperceptibly, the door behind the chair creaked open, and a figure stepped into the frame. They were wearing a long, dark coat, with the hood pulled up, obscuring their face. They moved slowly, deliberately, like they were aware of every pair of eyes watching them. Without saying a word, the figure reached into their coat and pulled out something that glinted in the low light. It was a knife. My stomach twisted as I watched them approach the chair and stab the blade into the wooden seat. For a moment, nothing happened. But then, the chat box exploded. People were typing in frenzied messages. some in languages I couldn't understand, others in broken English, all repeating the same phrase. "It's beginning." The camera zoomed in on the knife, and I could see something strange about the blade. It wasn't blood or anything like that. No, it was something else. The metal seemed to ripple, like it was alive, like it was breathing. And that's when I started to hear it. A faint rhythmic sound, like a heartbeat pulsing through my headphones. It was subtle at first, almost like it could have been part of the ambient noise. But as I focused on it, the sound grew louder, more distinct, until it was all I could hear. I wanted to turn it off, to close the window and shut my laptop, but I couldn't. My hands were frozen, eyes glued to the screen. The figure in the coat moved out of frame, leaving the knife still embedded in the chair. The camera lingered on it for a few seconds before cutting to black. For a moment, I thought it was over. I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding, but then the screen flashed again. This time, the image was different. It was a live feed, but not from the same room. No, this time, the camera was outside, and what I saw next made my blood run cold. It was a view of my street, my house. The camera was pointed directly at my front door. I'm staring at the screen right now, and the feed is still live. Someone is outside my house, and they're watching me. I've closed all the blinds, locked all the doors, but I can't shake the feeling that it's too late. I made the mistake of clicking that link, and now I've let something into my life that I can't escape. I don't know what's going to happen next, but I can hear it now. The faint sound of footsteps outside, growing louder, closer, with every passing second. I'm going to post this before it's too late. If you're reading this, don't make the same mistake I did. Stay off the dark web. Some things are hidden for a reason. I'm not sure how much time has passed since I last posted. Minutes? Hours? It's hard to tell when your heart is racing, like mine is right now. Every sound in the house makes me jump. I'm sitting in the corner of my room, staring at the blinds, barely daring to breathe. The live feed on my laptop is still active, but I can't bring myself to look at it anymore. It's too real, too terrifying. I muted the audio, but the image of my front door on the screen is burned into my mind. The way the camera is angled, it's like whoever is out there is standing right on my porch, just waiting. After I saw the feed switch to my street, I panicked. I thought about calling the police, but then the paranoia kicked in. What would I even say? Hey, I was watching a dark web live stream, and now someone's outside my house. That would go over well. Besides, there was a nagging thought at the back of my mind. What if this was all some sick joke? What if, by calling the cops, I'd be giving them exactly the reaction they wanted? But the more I tried to convince myself of that, the more I knew deep down that this was no prank. It was too specific, too personal. Someone knew where I lived. They knew I was watching, and now they were here. I tried peeking out through a gap in the blinds, just a quick look to see if anyone was actually out there. But all I could see was the dark outline of my front yard, dimly lit by the street lamp. No movement, no shadows, just an eerie stillness that sent chills down my spine. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something that nearly made me scream. The reflection in the glass wasn't just showing my yard, it was showing me. And right behind me, in the corner of the room, was a faint, distorted shadow. I spun around, heart hammering in my chest, but there was nothing there, just the empty room, the same as it's always been. But that didn't make me feel any better. If anything, it made it worse. How could a shadow be there if there was nothing to cast it? That's when I heard it. The sound that made my blood run cold. A soft, deliberate knock on the window. It wasn't the kind of sound the wind would make, or a tree branch brushing against the glass. No, it was a distinct, intentional knock, like someone was tapping just to let me know they were there. My entire body went rigid. I didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe. My eyes were glued to the blinds, half expecting them to fly open at any second, revealing whoever or whatever was outside. But the knock didn't come again. Instead, there was a long, agonizing silence, broken only by the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I wanted to run, to grab my keys and get the hell out of there, but something told me that leaving the house wasn't an option. Not anymore. Whatever was outside, it was waiting for me to make that mistake. Finally, I mustered up the courage to stand up. My legs were trembling as I took a step towards the door, half expecting something to burst through at any moment. But nothing happened. The door was still locked, and the house was as quiet as a tomb. I thought about going downstairs, about trying to catch a glimpse of the intruder from another window. But as I reached the top of the stairs, I froze. The floorboards at the bottom creaked, followed by another, louder knock. This time, it was on the front door. The sound echoed through the house, each knock a slow, deliberate strike that made my stomach churn. I backed away, not wanting to be anywhere near that door. Whoever was out there was toying with me, drawing out the fear, feeding off it, and I was giving them exactly what they wanted. I don't know why, but I ran to the kitchen and grabbed the biggest knife I could find. Holding it in my shaking hand made me feel slightly better, though I knew it wouldn't do much if whoever or whatever was out there decided to break in. I paced around the kitchen, trying to come up with a plan, but no matter what I thought of, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was trapped. It was like the walls were closing in on me, the air growing heavier with each passing second. I don't know how long I stood there, gripping that knife like it was my only lifeline. Eventually, the knocking stopped, replaced by another sound that was somehow even worse. The sound of footsteps, slow and measured, circling the house. They started at the front door, moving along the porch, then across the gravel path leading to the backyard. Each step was purposeful, heavy, like whoever it was wanted me to know exactly where they were. When they reached the back door, the footsteps paused, and I held my breath, waiting. But instead of a knock, there was a soft, scraping sound, like nails on glass. It came from the back window, the one overlooking the yard. I tightened my grip on the knife, my knuckles white, but I didn't move. I just stood there, listening to that horrible grating noise, imagining those nails dragging across the glass, leaving deep scratches behind. Then just as suddenly as it had started, the scraping stopped. The silence that followed was even more terrifying. I couldn't hear the footsteps anymore, couldn't hear anything at all. The house was eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're not alone. My phone buzzed in my pocket, making me jump. I fumbled to pull it out, my hands trembling so badly that I almost dropped it. The screen lit up with a notification, an email. For a second, I was confused. Who would be emailing me at this hour? But then I saw the subject line, and my heart skipped a beat. Do you see me? My blood ran cold as I opened the email. There was no text, just a single image attachment. With a sinking feeling, I tapped on the file, half hoping it was just another sick prank. But what I saw made my blood freeze. The image was a photo of my house, taken from the backyard. It was dark, grainy, but there was no mistaking it. It was the same view I would have seen if I'd looked out the window at that exact moment. Except, in the photo, there was a figure standing in the yard, just beyond the reach of the porch light. A tall, shadowy figure with its face turned towards the camera, towards me. I dropped the phone, my entire body trembling with fear. This wasn't just a game anymore. Whoever or whatever was outside knew exactly what they were doing. They were watching me, waiting for me to make a move, to let my guard down. And now, as I sit here in the dark, with every shadow seeming to move on its own, I can't help but wonder, what happens when they decide to stop playing? The silence in the house was deafening, broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards as I shifted my weight, knife still clutched tightly in my hand. The photo on my phone was burned into my mind, the image of that shadowy figure in my backyard, staring at me through the screen as if it could see right into my soul. I wanted to scream, to call out for help, but some primal instinct kept me quiet. The idea that making noise would give them exactly what they wanted, give them a reason to come inside, was overpowering. The air felt thick with anticipation, like the house itself was holding its breath. Then the phone in my hand buzzed again. I nearly dropped it out of sheer terror, but I forced myself to look. Another email, this time with no subject line. My thumb hovered over the screen, dreading what I might find, but I had to know. I had to see. I opened it, and my heart lurched when I saw what was inside. It wasn't a photo this time. It was a video file, just a few seconds long. I hesitated, my finger trembling as I hovered over the play button. But in the end, curiosity won out, as it always did. The video was dark, almost pitch black, but I could make out just enough to realize where it was filmed. It was a shot of my backyard, the same spot from the previous photo. The camera was unsteady, as if it was being held by someone who was struggling to keep still. The video started with the same eerie stillness, just the dim outline of my house in the background. Then after a few seconds, the camera jolted slightly, and something moved in the foreground. Something small, almost unnoticeable at first, but as I squinted at the screen, my blood ran cold. It was me, or more accurately, it was the reflection of me, barely visible in the window's glass. The reflection was faint, distorted by the angle and the darkness, but it was unmistakable. I was standing at the window, knife in hand, staring out into the yard, just as I was now. But here's the thing. There was no way I could have been caught on camera. I hadn't gone near the window since I first noticed the shadow in the reflection. I hadn't moved from my spot in the kitchen, frozen in fear. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The video wasn't live. It was recorded. Someone had been in my backyard before, filming me without my knowledge. They had been watching me the entire time, long before I had any idea something was wrong. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely hold on to the phone. My breath came in short, ragged gasps as I tried to make sense of it all. Whoever was out there, they weren't just messing with me. They had been planning this, studying me, knowing exactly when and how to strike. The phone buzzed again, a new email notification appearing on the screen. This time, I didn't hesitate. I opened it immediately, my heart racing as I braced myself for whatever fresh horror awaited. But instead of another image or video, there was just a single line of text. Call me. Beneath the message was a phone number. My mind raced, 1,000 questions flooding in all at once. Who were they? What did they want? And most importantly, what would happen if I actually called? I knew it was a terrible idea. Every fiber of my being was screaming at me not to do it, to turn off the phone, barricade myself in the closet, and wait for it all to end. But I couldn't. Some twisted sense of curiosity, or maybe desperation, pushed me to dial the number. The phone rang once, twice, and then a click. A cold, eerie silence filled my ear as the call connected. I waited, the seconds stretching into what felt like hours, until finally a voice spoke. It was soft, almost a whisper, but it carried a weight that made my blood turn to ice. "I see you." I didn't respond. I couldn't. My mouth was dry, my throat constricted with fear. "Don't bother hiding," the voice continued, calm and deliberate. "I know exactly where you are." I wanted to hang up, to end the call and pretend I never heard those words, but I was frozen, gripped by a terror that I had never felt before. "Come outside," the voice said, almost coaxing. "It's time we met." "No," I finally managed to choke out, the word barely more than a breath. The voice on the other end chuckled, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. "You're scared. I like that. But you should know, running won't help. This isn't just some game you can quit. You opened the door, and now it's too late to close it." The line went dead, the voice disappearing into the ether, leaving me with nothing but the sound of my own frantic breathing. I dropped the phone, my mind racing with thoughts of escape. But deep down, I knew the voice was right. There was no way out. I don't know how long I sat there, huddled in the corner of the kitchen, the knife still clutched in my hand. The house was silent again, but it wasn't the comforting kind of silence. It was the kind that makes you feel like something terrible is about to happen, like the calm before a storm. The only thing I could hear was the faint buzzing of the Livestream still running on my laptop. With a sense of dread, I forced myself to look at the screen again. The camera feed was still focused on my front door, but this time, something was different. The door was open. I don't remember hearing it unlock, don't remember it creaking open on its own, but there it was, wide open, the dark night spilling into the hallway, and standing in the doorway, partially obscured by the shadows, was the figure from the backyard. They were closer now, close enough that I could see the outline of their face, though the details were still hidden by the darkness. But there was something about their presence, something that made every hair on my body stand on end. It was like they weren't entirely human. I should have run, should have done something, anything, but my body refused to move. All I could do was watch as the figure stepped forward, one slow, deliberate step after another, until they were standing in the center of the hallway. Then, as if sensing my eyes on them, they turned their head, looking directly at the camera, directly at me. And for the first time, I saw their face. But it wasn't a face at all. It was a mask, pale and featureless, with empty black holes where the eyes should have been. A grotesque parody of a human face, like something out of a nightmare. And then, without warning, they lifted their hand and waved. A slow, mocking wave, as if to say, "I'm coming for you." I don't know what's going to happen next. I don't even know if I'll be able to post again. But if you're reading this, if you've somehow found yourself in the same situation, remember this. Don't answer the call. Don't open the door. And whatever you do, don't look outside. I don't know how I'm still functioning. My body feels like it's running on pure adrenaline. every nerve stretched to its breaking point. The house is so quiet that even my own breathing sounds deafening. The only thing I can focus on is that mask, that pale, featureless mask staring at me through the screen, its hollow eyes boring into my soul. I wanted to believe it was all a twisted prank, that any second now someone would jump out from behind a corner, laughing at how easily I'd been fooled. But the fear I felt wasn't something you could fake. It was raw, primal, the kind that sinks its claws into you and doesn't let go. The figure in the mask didn't move for what felt like an eternity. They just stood there, perfectly still, as if they were waiting for something, waiting for me to make a mistake. And then, with a slow, deliberate motion, they reached out and pushed the front door closed. The sound of the latch clicking into place echoed through the house, making me flinch. The only thing worse than knowing they were inside was knowing they had sealed themselves in with me. The camera feed didn't change. It stayed focused on that hallway, the dim light casting long, ominous shadows. I couldn't see the figure anymore, but I knew they were there, just out of sight, lurking in the darkness. I forced myself to move, to get up from the floor where I'd been crouched. Every muscle in my body protested, stiff and sore from the tension. The knife in my hand felt heavy, like it was dragging me down, but I couldn't let go of it. It was the only thing giving me any sense of security, however false that might be. Slowly, I made my way to the hallway, trying to stay as quiet as possible. My heart was pounding so loudly in my chest that I was sure they could hear it. With every step, I expected to see that mask appear around the corner, those hollow eyes fixed on me, but the hallway remained empty. When I reached the living room, I stopped, listening. The silence was oppressive, pressing in on me from all sides. I could feel the presence of something, like the air itself was charged with electricity, but I couldn't see anything out of the ordinary. Then I heard it, a faint rustling sound, like fabric brushing against the floor. It was coming from the direction of the kitchen, where I had been just minutes before. My mind raced, trying to figure out what to do. Should I hide? Run? Confront whoever, or whatever, was in my house? Before I could make a decision, the rustling stopped, replaced by a soft, almost imperceptible creak. The kind of sound a door makes when it's being slowly opened. The kitchen. They were in the kitchen. I took a step back, every instinct screaming at me to flee, but my feet were rooted to the spot. I couldn't just run. If I did, they'd know exactly where I was. I needed to be smart, to stay one step ahead. Carefully, I backed up until I was pressed against the wall, trying to keep my breathing under control. The knife felt slippery in my sweaty hand, and I tightened my grip, willing myself to stay calm. The creaking grew louder, and then I saw it, the edge of the kitchen door, slowly swinging open. My heart skipped a beat as the figure in the mask emerged, stepping into the living room with the same slow, deliberate movements as before. They were taller than I'd realized, their presence even more imposing up close. The mask obscured any facial features, but there was something unnervingly human about the way they moved, like they were imitating what a person should be, but not quite getting it right. They paused in the middle of the room, head tilting slightly, as if they were listening for something. I held my breath, praying they wouldn't turn in my direction. The seconds ticked by, each one an eternity, until finally they began to move again, walking towards the hallway I had just come from. I had to act. I couldn't let them trap me. With every ounce of courage I could muster, I took a step forward, knife raised, ready to defend myself if I had to. But then they stopped. The figure was just a few feet away from the hallway when they suddenly froze, their head turning ever so slightly in my direction. I don't know how they knew I was there. Maybe they could hear my heart pounding, or maybe they sensed the shift in the air. But in that moment, I knew there was no escape. The figure took a step towards me, slow and deliberate. I backed away, my mind racing for a way out, but there was none. The living room was small, the exit blocked by the intruder, and there was no way I could fight them off. Not like this. Then, something unexpected happened. The figure stopped again, just a few feet away from me, and slowly, almost mechanically, they reached up and began to remove the mask. My breath caught in my throat as I watched, frozen with fear. I wanted to close my eyes, to turn away, but I couldn't. I had to see who or what was behind that mask. But when the mask finally came off, what I saw was far worse than I could have ever imagined. There was nothing there. Where a face should have been, there was only a void, a dark, empty space that seemed to swallow the light around it. It was like staring into an abyss, a bottomless pit of darkness that seemed to draw me in, pulling at the edges of my sanity. The figure took another step forward, and I felt the cold grip of terror tighten around my heart. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body refused to obey. All I could do was stand there, staring into that void as it grew closer and closer until it was all I could see. And then, just as I thought the darkness would consume me, I heard it, the sound of my phone ringing. The shrill tone cut through the silence like a knife, snapping me back to reality. I blinked, and suddenly, the figure was gone. The living room was empty, the mask lying on the floor where they had stood, but the phone kept ringing, pulling me further out of the nightmare. I stumbled towards it, my hand shaking so badly that I almost dropped the knife. When I finally managed to pick up the phone, I didn't recognize the number, but I answered it anyway. Hello? My voice was barely more than a whisper, trembling with fear. There was a long pause on the other end, and then a voice spoke. But it wasn't the same voice as before. This one was softer, more distant, like it was coming from somewhere far away. Don't trust what you see, the voice said, the words distorted, like they were being spoken through a tunnel. It's not real. None of this is real. I wanted to scream at them, to demand answers, but the line went dead before I could say anything. I was left standing there, phone in one hand, knife in the other, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The only thing I knew for sure was that whatever was happening, it was far from over. The phone call left me reeling, my mind spinning in 1,000 different directions. Don't trust what you see. The words echoed in my head, gnawing at the last remnants of my sanity. What did they mean? How could this not be real? Everything I had experienced felt terrifyingly, brutally real. I needed to get out of there. I could feel the walls of the house closing in on me, the air growing thick and suffocating. My grip tightened on the knife, but I knew it wouldn't protect me. Not from this. Whatever this was, it was beyond anything a simple weapon could fend off. I forced myself to move, each step heavy and uncertain. I had to get to the front door. I had to leave this place, put as much distance between myself and whatever was haunting me. But as I crossed the living room, something caught my eye. The laptop, still sitting on the coffee table, the live stream still running. I didn't want to look. I knew I shouldn't, but something compelled me to turn my gaze back to the screen to see what horrors were waiting for me now. The camera feed had changed again. It was no longer focused on the front door. Instead, it was showing the inside of the house. My house. The view was from the hallway, just outside the living room, as if someone had set up the camera right there, mere feet from where I was standing. A cold dread settled in the pit of my stomach. I watched, transfixed, as the camera slowly panned around the hallway, moving with a deliberate slowness that made my skin crawl. The hallway was empty, but the eerie stillness, the way the camera moved, made it feel like something was just out of sight, lurking in the shadows. And then the camera turned to the living room. It stopped moving, focusing on one spot, on me. My breath caught in my throat. I could see myself on the screen, standing there, knife in hand, staring back at the camera with wide, terrified eyes. But something was wrong. The image was distorted, like a bad reflection in a funhouse mirror. My face was stretched, twisted, almost unrecognizable. It was like I was looking at a version of myself from a nightmare. But that wasn't the worst part. As I watched, the screen flickered, just for a second, and in that brief moment, I saw something standing behind me. A figure, tall and shadowy, just like the one I had seen earlier. But this time, it wasn't wearing a mask. It didn't need to. Its face, or what should have been its face, was a void, a deep, dark nothingness that seemed to suck all the light out of the room. I spun around, knife raised, ready to defend myself. But there was nothing there. The room was empty, just as it had been a moment ago. I was alone, or at least I thought I was. The phone in my hand buzzed again, and I nearly dropped it in my panic. Another email notification. With shaking hands, I opened it, dreading what I might find. The email was blank, except for a single attachment, a video file. My heart sank as I realized what it was. I didn't want to watch it. I knew whatever it showed would be something I could never unsee, something that would haunt me forever. But I had no choice. I tapped the screen, and the video began to play. At first, the screen was black. There was no sound, no movement, just darkness. Then, slowly, the image came into focus. It was a shot of the inside of a room, but not just any room. It was my bedroom. The camera was positioned at the foot of my bed, aimed directly at the window. The curtains were drawn, but faint light seeped in from the street outside. For a moment, nothing happened. The room was still, quiet, but then the curtains began to move, as if caught by a breeze. Except there was no breeze. The curtains slowly parted, revealing the window behind them. And standing outside, staring in through the glass, was the same figure. The void-faced figure, watching me with its hollow, empty gaze. I could feel my blood turning to ice. The video continued, showing the figure standing there, motionless, just watching. It didn't try to get in. It didn't need to. It was already inside my head, inside my life. There was no escaping it. And then, the camera angle changed. It was subtle, barely noticeable at first, but it was enough to make my stomach drop. The view shifted, moving from the foot of the bed to the side, as if someone or something had picked up the camera and was carrying it. The figure outside the window grew closer, its dark form looming larger in the frame. The camera kept moving, slowly, deliberately, until it was almost pressed against the glass. The figure was right there, inches away, its void of a face staring directly into the lens. I couldn't breathe. My hands were trembling so badly that I could barely hold on to the phone. I wanted to scream, to throw the phone across the room, to make it stop, but I couldn't move. I was paralyzed by fear. The video continued, and the camera slowly panned down, away from the figure's face. It moved to the window latch, which began to turn, almost by itself, with a soft, eerie creak. The window slid open, inch by agonizing inch, until there was just enough space for the figure to reach through. And then, it did. A hand, if you could call it that, reached through the gap, long, thin fingers curling around the window frame. The skin was pale, almost translucent, with dark veins pulsing just beneath the surface. The hand gripped the frame, pulling it open wider, making space for the figure to enter. The camera zoomed in on the hand, lingering on it as it slowly, deliberately pulled the window open. The figure didn't rush. It didn't need to. It knew there was no escape, no way out. It was in control. The video cut out just as the figure began to climb through the window. The screen went black, leaving me staring at my own reflection in the phone's glass. My face was pale, my eyes wide with terror. I dropped the phone, my heart pounding in my chest. I could feel the cold sweat on my skin, the nausea rising in my throat. I needed to get out. I needed to leave before it was too late. But as I turned towards the door, I heard it. A soft, deliberate creak coming from behind me. The sound of a window opening. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to know. But some part of me, the part that had gotten me into this mess in the first place, forced me to turn around. And there it was. The window, the same one from the video, was open. The curtains fluttered gently in the night air, and standing just inside the room, silhouetted against the darkness outside, was the figure. It was real. All of it was real. The figure stepped forward, the void where its face should have been fixed on me. I backed away, my legs weak, barely able to hold me up. The knife slipped from my hand, clattering to the floor, but I didn't even notice. I was trapped. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The figure advanced slowly, each step deliberate, methodical, like it was savoring the moment. As it drew closer, the void where its face should have been seemed to expand, pulling me in, swallowing the light, the room, everything. My vision blurred, my thoughts fragmented, and I could feel myself slipping away, falling into that darkness. The last thing I remember was a figure reaching out, its hand brushing against my cheek, cold as death. And then, everything went black. I woke up in my bed, drenched in sweat, my heart racing. The room was exactly as it had been before, everything in its place, as if nothing had happened, but I knew it had. I could still feel the lingering chill on my skin, the terror clinging to the edges of my mind. I scrambled for my phone, half expecting to see the live stream still running, the email still there. But when I checked, there was nothing. No emails, no video files, no evidence that any of it had happened. But I knew better. I knew it wasn't just a dream, wasn't just my imagination. The memory of that void-faced figure was too vivid, too real. It was burned into my mind, a scar that would never heal. I don't know how much time has passed since that night. The days blur together now, every shadow a reminder, every creak of the floorboards sending me into a spiral of fear. I've tried to go back to my normal life, to pretend that everything is okay. But it isn't. It never will be. Because sometimes, late at night, I hear it again. The soft creak of a window opening, the rustle of curtains in the dark. And I know deep down that it's still out there, still watching, waiting. And one day, it will come for me again. When it does, I won't be able to stop it. and neither will you. I found a dark web tutorial on astral projection. Now I'm stuck outside my own body. Hey everyone, I don't usually post stuff like this, but I'm freaking out and I need to get this off my chest. It's not like I can just go to a therapist and say, oh hey, I accidentally messed with the astral plane and now I can't get back into my body. So here I am on Reddit, hoping anyone might have some advice or at least tell me I'm not crazy. So, a bit of background first. I've always been the curious type. You know, the kind of person who just has to click that shady link or dig through the weird corners of the internet. That's me. I'm not proud of it, but it's how I've always been. It started with just browsing the usual creepy forums. Then it turned into a fascination with the deep web. You'd be surprised what you can find if you're willing to dig deep enough. Most of it's just lame, fake crap. But sometimes you stumble onto something that feels too real. About a month ago, I was in one of those moods where I just wanted to see something strange. I fired up Tor, did my usual rounds, and found myself on this old, grimy-looking site. The design was awful, like it was made in the early 2000s and never updated. But it had this long list of services and tutorials, most of which looked like total BS. Things like how to curse your enemies, or summon a demon in 10 easy steps. I was about to click out when one title caught my eye. Mastering Astral Projection. Leave your body and explore the unknown. Now, I'd heard of astral projection before. A friend of mine in college was into all that new age stuff, and she used to swear she could leave her body at will. She'd talk about it like it was the most peaceful, enlightening experience, but I never bought into it. Still, I was curious. How could you not be? The idea of floating around, untethered by your physical body, seeing things no one else can see. It's the kind of thing that sticks with you, even if you don't really believe it. So, like an idiot, I clicked on it. The page loaded super slowly, like it was being pulled up from some ancient server buried deep in the earth. When it finally appeared, it wasn't what I expected. There was no long-winded intro or list of warnings. Just a short paragraph in this eerie, jagged font that made my skin crawl. It read, "Do you seek to transcend the limitations of your mortal shell? To explore the realms beyond our waking world? Follow these steps precisely, and you shall achieve true astral projection. But be warned, once you step beyond, the way back is not guaranteed." Below that, there was a set of instructions. They seemed simple enough, almost laughably so. I won't go into the details. Honestly, I wouldn't want anyone to try this, even if they were dumb enough to think it's a good idea. But the gist of it was to create a specific environment, focus on a certain pattern of thoughts, and then wait for a sign that you're ready to project. I remember thinking it was all nonsense, but a part of me, a stupid, reckless part, was intrigued. What did I have to lose? It's not like I expected anything to happen. Worst case, I'd waste an hour or two and get a funny story out of it. So, I decided to give it a shot. That night, I followed the instructions to the letter. I set up my room just as the tutorial described, dimming the lights and playing this weird, droning music that was supposed to help tune my mind or something. I laid down on my bed, closed my eyes, and started focusing like it said. It was boring at first, like trying to meditate when you're not really into it. But after a while, something strange happened. My body started feeling heavy, like it was sinking into the mattress. At the same time, My mind felt like it was expanding, like my thoughts were spreading out beyond my skull. I know that sounds crazy, but it was this weird sensation of being in two places at once. I thought I was just falling asleep, but then it got stronger. The heaviness turned into a kind of paralysis. I couldn't move, couldn't open my eyes, but I was completely awake. Then I heard it, the sign the tutorial mentioned. It was a low, humming sound, almost like a chant, but not in any language I've ever heard. It felt like it was coming from inside my head, vibrating through my skull, and that's when I felt it. A sharp tug, like something was pulling me out of myself. Before I knew it, I was floating above my bed, looking down at my own body. Guys, I swear, I could see myself lying there, completely still, eyes closed, chest barely rising and falling. I was just hovering, weightless, in the middle of my room. I should have been terrified, but I wasn't. It felt strangely natural, like this was something I was always meant to do. That's when I realized the tutorial wasn't just some made-up crap. It had worked. I was astral projecting, but that's also when I noticed something else, something I hadn't been prepared for. In the corner of my room, where the shadows were darkest, there was something, a shape. It wasn't clear at first, just a vague outline, but as I focused on it, it started to solidify, and it was watching me. I tried to move, to get back into my body, but I couldn't. I was stuck, floating there, staring at this thing that shouldn't have been there. My heart, or whatever part of me was still connected to my body, started racing. I don't know how long I was there, just locked in place, but it felt like forever. Finally, with a tremendous effort, I managed to wrench myself back. It was like being sucked into a vacuum. The next thing I knew, I was gasping for air, my body drenched in sweat, my heart pounding like it was going to explode. But the worst part? When I opened my eyes, the shadows in the corner of my room were still there, and I could feel them, watching. That was the first night. Things have only gotten worse since then. I didn't sleep at all that first night, after the projection. I just lay there, staring at the dark corner of my room where that thing had been. I couldn't see it anymore, but I knew it was still there, lurking just out of sight. The whole room felt different, like it wasn't just mine anymore, like something had claimed a piece of it for itself. When the first light of dawn started creeping through my blinds, I finally got up, every muscle in my body sore and stiff. I felt like I'd run a marathon, even though I hadn't moved all night. My head was pounding, my throat dry. It was like I'd been drained, not just physically, but, I don't know, spiritually. I know that sounds weird, but it's the only way I can describe it. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just a bad dream, that I'd been half asleep and imagined the whole thing. But deep down, I knew better. The way I felt, the heaviness in my limbs, the cold knot of fear in my stomach. It was too real to dismiss as just a nightmare. I dragged myself to the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face, hoping it would wake me up from whatever fog I was in. When I looked in the mirror, I almost didn't recognize the person staring back at me. My eyes were bloodshot, with dark circles underneath, like I hadn't slept in days. My skin was pale, almost gray. I looked haunted. The next few days were a blur. I kept telling myself to just go about my life, act normal, and maybe it would all go away. But it didn't. Everywhere I went, I felt like I was being watched, not just in my room, but in every shadow, every dark corner. I'd catch glimpses of something moving in my peripheral vision, but when I turned to look, there was nothing there. I tried to ignore it, but it was always there, a constant presence that I couldn't escape. My apartment, once my safe space, now felt like a trap. I started leaving the lights on all the time, even during the day, but it didn't help. The shadows still lingered, deeper and darker than they should have been, like they were alive. It wasn't just the feeling of being watched either. I started hearing things, soft whispers, just on the edge of my hearing, like someone was speaking to me from far away. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but the more I heard it, the clearer it became. I couldn't make out what it was saying, but the tone was unmistakable. It was mocking, taunting me, like it knew something I didn't. I stopped sleeping, too afraid of what might happen if I let my guard down. Every time I closed my eyes, I could feel myself slipping back into that state where my body felt heavy and my mind felt like it was drifting away. But now, I was too terrified to let it happen. I didn't want to leave my body again, not if it meant encountering that thing again, whatever it was. But as the days went on, it became harder and harder to stay awake. My thoughts became muddled, and I couldn't focus on anything for more than a few minutes. I started making mistakes at work, missing deadlines, forgetting to eat. My friends noticed something was off, but I just brushed them off, telling them I was fine, just stressed. But I wasn't fine. I was losing it, and I knew it. It all came to a head about a week after the projection. I was sitting on my couch, trying to watch TV, but I couldn't focus on anything. The whispers were getting louder, more insistent, and I was starting to make out words. They were saying my name, over and over in this horrible, distorted voice. It was like a record being played at the wrong speed, slow and warped. Then the power went out. I was plunged into darkness, and the whispers stopped. For a moment, there was complete silence, and I thought maybe, just maybe, it was over. But then I saw it. In the reflection of the TV screen, I saw something moving behind me. Slowly, I turned around, my heart hammering in my chest. And there it was, standing in the doorway, just barely visible in the faint light coming through the window. It was the same shadowy figure I'd seen that night, but now it was more defined, more real. It was tall and thin, its outline jagged and wrong, like it didn't quite fit into the world. And it was just standing there, watching me. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. All I could do was stare at it, my mind screaming at me to run, but my body frozen in place. It started to move, slowly, gliding toward me without making a sound. The closer it got, the colder the room became, until I could see my breath in the air. When it was just a few feet away, I finally snapped out of it. I scrambled off the couch, backing away until I was pressed up against the wall, my hands fumbling for anything I could use to defend myself. But there was nothing. I was trapped. Then, without warning, it stopped. It just stood there, staring at me, with eyes I couldn't see, but could somehow feel. The whispers started again, louder this time, almost deafening, repeating my name over and over. And then, it spoke. "Come back," it said, in that same distorted voice. "You don't belong here anymore." I didn't know what it meant, but the words sent a chill through my entire body. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was paralyzed with fear. It was like I was back in that moment when I was floating above my body, unable to move, unable to do anything but watch. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. The lights flickered back on, and the room was empty, like nothing had happened. But I knew it wasn't over. It was never over. That night, I left my apartment and checked into a cheap motel on the other side of town. I didn't care how run down it was. I just needed to get away from that place, from the shadows and the whispers. I didn't sleep much, but at least I felt a little safer. At least the thing hadn't followed me there. Or so I thought, because now, as I sit here in this dingy motel room, typing this out, I can feel it again. The air is getting colder, and the lights are flickering. I can hear the whispers, faint but growing louder, and I know it's coming for me. I barely slept at the motel, but when morning came, I knew I couldn't stay there forever. I had to face it, whatever it was. I told myself that it was probably all in my head, that I was just stressed or sleep deprived, but deep down, I knew the truth. There was something out there, something that had latched onto me the moment I left my body, and it wasn't going to let go. After checking out of the motel, I drove around aimlessly, too scared to go back to my apartment, too exhausted to keep going. Eventually, I pulled into a parking lot of a coffee shop, hoping the caffeine might clear my head and give me some sort of plan. But no matter how much coffee I drank, the dread didn't lift. It was like a weight in my chest, pressing down harder and harder with every passing hour. I needed answers. I needed to know what was happening to me. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I went back online. But this time, I didn't go to the deep web. I wasn't about to dig myself deeper into this nightmare. Instead, I searched for anything I could find about astral projection and the dangers that come with it. I sifted through countless pages of New Age blogs and paranormal forums, but none of them mentioned anything like what I was experiencing. Then I found something, a post buried deep in an old forum, the kind of place where the background is black and the text is neon green. The post was from years ago, but it described something eerily similar to what I was going through. The author claimed they had been followed after attempting astral projection, that a shadowy figure had attached itself to them, appearing in the corners of their vision, in the reflections of mirrors, even in their dreams. But the most chilling part was what they said next. It feeds on your fear. The more you run, the stronger it gets. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead as I read those words. Was that what I'd been doing? Running from this thing, giving it exactly what it wanted. The post went on to say that the only way to break free was to confront it, to stand your ground, and refuse to be afraid. But the author didn't say how to do that, or what happened to them afterward. The thread just ended, like they'd never come back to finish the story. I sat there in my car, for what felt like hours, just staring at the screen, trying to wrap my head around what I'd read. I didn't want to believe it, but what choice did I have? Nothing else made sense. If this thing fed on fear, then running away wasn't an option anymore. I had to face it somehow. With a heavy heart, I made the decision to go back to my apartment. If it was going to come for me, I'd rather it be on my own turf. But even as I thought that, my stomach churned with fear. Could I really do this? Could I really face whatever was haunting me? The drive back was a blur. The sun was setting by the time I pulled into my parking lot, casting long shadows across the pavement. I hesitated before getting out of the car, half expecting to see that shadowy figure waiting for me. But the lot was empty, silent, except for the distant hum of traffic. My apartment was just as I'd left it, but it felt different now. Darker, colder. Every corner seemed to hide something. Every shadow seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at it. I locked the door behind me, my hands shaking, and took a deep breath. If I was going to do this, I needed to be ready. I turned on every light in the place, grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer, and then sat on the edge of my bed, trying to steady my nerves. I kept telling myself that I wasn't going to run, that I was going to face this thing head on. But the truth was, I was terrified. The kind of fear that sinks into your bones and refuses to let go. Hours passed. The shadows in the room seemed to stretch and warp as the night wore on, like they were alive, crawling across the walls toward me. I could feel the temperature dropping, could hear the whispers starting again, faint and distant, but growing closer, like a storm on the horizon. I gripped the flashlight tighter, my knuckles white. My heart was pounding in my chest, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I kept reminding myself of what I'd read. It feeds on fear. Don't let it see you're afraid. But how could I not be afraid? Then just past midnight, the lights flickered and went out. The darkness swallowed the room, and with it came a silence so profound I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. I fumbled for the flashlight, clicking it on, but the beam of light seemed pitifully weak against the inky blackness that surrounded me. And that's when I saw it. It was standing at the foot of my bed, just barely illuminated by the flashlight. The same tall, shadowy figure from before, but this time it was clearer, more defined. Its outline was sharp, jagged, like it was cut from the very fabric of the darkness itself. And it was watching me with eyes that I couldn't see but could feel, boring into me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. For a moment, I was paralyzed with fear. Everything in me screamed to run, to get as far away from this thing as possible. But I knew that was exactly what it wanted. If I ran now, I'd never be free of it. So I forced myself to stay still, to meet its gaze, even though every instinct was telling me to look away. My hands were shaking so badly that the flashlight's beam wobbled, casting strange, flickering shadows across the room. But I didn't let go. I kept the light trained on it, refusing to let it disappear into the darkness. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, filling my head with a cacophony of voices, all of them calling my name, telling me to come closer, to give in. But I clenched my teeth, refusing to listen. For what felt like an eternity, we just stared at each other, me with the flashlight, it with those invisible eyes. The room grew colder, the air thick with an oppressive presence that pressed down on me, suffocating me. My mind was racing, thoughts tumbling over each other in a frantic attempt to make sense of what was happening. But there was no sense to it, no logic, only fear. And then, without warning, it moved. It lunged at me, faster than I could react, its form dissolving into the shadows that surrounded me. The whispers became a deafening roar, filling my head with 1,000 voices all screaming at once. The darkness closed in, swallowing the light, swallowing everything. But I didn't run. Instead, I did the only thing I could think of. I closed my eyes and screamed. I screamed as loud as I could, pouring every ounce of fear, anger, and frustration into that single, desperate cry. And as I screamed, something incredible happened. The darkness recoiled, like it had been struck, and the whispers faltered, their deafening roar reduced to a low, uncertain murmur. I opened my eyes, just in time to see the figure retreating, its form flickering and unstable, like it was struggling to hold itself together. It glared at me, or at least I felt it glaring, with a hatred so intense it burned. But it didn't come closer. It just stood there, as if it was waiting for something. And then slowly, it began to fade. The darkness lifted. The oppressive weight in the air eased. and the whispers gradually died away, leaving only the faint echo of my own heartbeat in my ears. The figure, now barely visible, took one last look at me before dissolving into the shadows completely. The lights flickered back on, and I was alone. I collapsed onto the bed, the adrenaline finally wearing off, leaving me weak and trembling. I didn't know if it was over, didn't know if the thing would come back, but for the first time, in what felt like forever, I felt a small glimmer of hope. I'd faced it, and I hadn't run. Maybe that was enough. Maybe. But as I lay there, trying to calm my racing heart, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. That whatever it wasn't gone for good. It was just waiting, biding its time, watching from the shadows, waiting for the next time I'd be too weak to fight back. The days after that night were a haze of exhaustion and paranoia. I hadn't defeated it, whatever it was, but I'd pushed it back, bought myself some time. But how much? That was the question that gnawed at me, a constant, nagging thought that wouldn't leave me alone. I stopped going to work. I stopped talking to friends. I barely even left my apartment. How could I explain what was happening to me? No one would believe me. They'd think I was losing my mind. And maybe I was. But the fear was real. The shadows were real. And the thing that haunted them, it was real too. Every night, I'd lie in bed, waiting, listening for the whispers that would signal its return. I kept the lights on, every single one, but it didn't matter. The darkness was always there, lurking just beyond the reach of the light, pressing in on me from all sides. I'd fall asleep out of sheer exhaustion, only to wake up moments later, heart pounding, sure that it was there in the room with me, but it never showed itself again, at least not the way it had before. No more shadows at the foot of my bed, no more whispering voices calling my name. Instead, it found a new way to torment me. It started with the dreams. At first, they were just fragments, pieces of nightmares that I couldn't quite remember when I woke up. I'd see flashes of that shadowy figure, glimpses of dark, endless corridors, and hear snatches of those horrible whispers. But each time I woke, the details would slip away, leaving me with only a vague sense of dread and a pounding heart. But then, the dreams started to become more vivid, more real. In the dreams, I'd find myself back in my apartment, but it wasn't the same. The walls were warped, twisted, like they were closing in on me. The windows were blacked out, and the air was thick with a musty, suffocating smell. I'd walk through the rooms, trying to find a way out, but every door led me back to where I started. No matter how fast I ran, no matter how desperately I searched, I was trapped. And then it would appear, the shadowy figure, waiting for me in the dark corners, watching, always watching. But in the dreams, it wasn't just a shadow. It had form, substance. Its body was tall and gaunt, its limbs too long, its fingers ending in sharp, claw-like points. Its face, I can't even describe its face. It was just wrong, a twisted parody of a human face, features distorted as if seen through cracked glass. In the dream, I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. All I could do was watch as it came closer and closer, its mouth stretching into a grotesque smile that split its face wide open. And then, just as it reached out to touch me, I'd wake up, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. This became my new reality, spending my days in a fog of fear and my nights trapped in a cycle of nightmares that seemed more real each time. The worst part was that I couldn't tell where the dreams ended and reality began. Sometimes I'd wake up and find myself standing in the middle of the room, staring at nothing, as if I'd been sleepwalking. Other times, I'd wake up with scratches on my arms, deep and fresh, like something had clawed at me in my sleep. But then came the night that changed everything. I remember it vividly because it was the first night in weeks that I actually felt calm. The apartment was quiet, no whispers, no flickering lights, nothing. I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd finally beaten it. Maybe it had given up and moved on. I should have known better. That night, the dream was different. I wasn't in my apartment this time. I was in a place that was both familiar and alien at the same time. It looked like a forest, but the trees were wrong, their bark black and twisted, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. The ground beneath my feet was soft, almost like it was pulsing, alive. I walked through the forest, not out of choice, but because I had to. It was like something was pulling me forward, dragging me deeper into the heart of the darkness. I could hear something ahead, a faint noise that grew louder as I walked. At first, I couldn't place it, but then I realized it was the sound of whispering, the same whispers that had haunted me for weeks. But this time, they were different. They weren't calling my name. They were chanting, repeating the same phrase over and over in that distorted, slow voice that made my skin crawl. Join us, join us, join us. The words sent a shiver down my spine, but I couldn't stop moving. The trees closed in around me, their branches brushing against my skin, leaving trails of coal fire wherever they touched. And then I saw it. In the center of the forest was a clearing, and in the clearing was a massive, ancient tree. Its bark the same black as the others, but more gnarled, more twisted. Its roots spread out across the ground, writhing like snakes. And at the base of the tree, there was a door made of the same dark wood, set into the trunk like it was part of the tree itself. It was old, the wood cracked and splintered, but it exuded a kind of power, something ancient and malevolent. I didn't want to go near it. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to turn and run, to get as far away from that door as possible. But I couldn't. I was drawn to it, compelled to reach out and touch it, even though I knew something horrible was waiting on the other side. My hand moved on its own, fingers brushing against the rough surface of the door. It was cold to the touch, colder than anything I'd ever felt. And as soon as my skin made contact, the whispers stopped. Silence. Complete and utter silence. The kind that presses down on you, that makes you feel like you're suffocating. And then the door creaked open. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to see what was inside, but I couldn't stop myself. Slowly, the door swung inward, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. But it wasn't empty. I could feel something in there, something waiting for me, just out of sight, something that had been waiting for a long, long time. Then, out of the darkness, two pale, clawed hands reached out, grabbing hold of the doorframe, pulling something out into the light. It was the shadowy figure, but this time, it was more than just a shadow. It was solid, its body a twisted mass of black tendrils and sharp edges, its face a void, a gaping hole where its mouth should have been. And from that hole came the whispers, louder than ever, echoing in my mind. Join us. I tried to scream, tried to pull away, but I was rooted to the spot, unable to move, unable to do anything but stare as it stepped closer, its body unraveling like smoke, wrapping around me, pulling me into its embrace. And then I felt it. The cold. The absolute, bone-chilling cold, seeping into my skin, into my very soul. It wasn't just touching me. It was merging with me, becoming a part of me. I could feel its thoughts, its hunger, its hatred. It wanted me. It wanted to consume me, to drag me into the darkness with it, to make me part of whatever twisted, nightmarish world it came from. I fought against it with everything I had, but it was too strong. I could feel myself slipping away, my mind being swallowed by the darkness, my body going numb as it took control. And then, just as I was about to give in, I woke up. But this time, the dream didn't end. I was in my bed, in my apartment, but the cold, the darkness, it was still there. The figure was still there, standing at the foot of my bed, its form more solid than ever, its tendrils reaching out for me. And I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that this wasn't a dream anymore. This was real. It had followed me out of the nightmare, into the waking world, and it wasn't going to stop until it had me. I didn't have time to think. The figure was moving toward me, its tendrils creeping along the floor, reaching for me with a slow, deliberate malice. My heart pounded in my chest, my breath coming in shallow gasps as I scrambled out of bed, nearly tripping over my own feet in my desperation to get away. But where could I go? The door was on the other side of the room, and every instinct I had told me that if I tried to run, it would catch me before I even made it halfway. The air was thick with that same suffocating cold from my nightmare, so cold that my breath came out in clouds of mist. I backed into the corner of the room, my hands fumbling for something, anything that I could use to defend myself. But what could possibly protect me from this thing? It wasn't just a ghost, not just some figment of my imagination. It was something far worse, something ancient and malevolent, something that had come for me, and me alone. The whispers were back, louder than ever, filling the room with their insidious chant. "Join us! Join us! Join us!" The words echoed inside my skull, reverberating through my bones, shaking me to my core. And then, as the figure loomed closer, I realized something. The words weren't just a command. They were an invitation. It wanted me to give in, to surrender, to become part of whatever darkness it came from. And if I did, it would be over. The fear, the nightmares, the cold, it would all end. I could feel the temptation, the seductive pull of oblivion, promising release from the torment that had consumed my life. But I couldn't give in. I wouldn't give in. With a surge of desperation, I grabbed the closest thing I could find, a heavy metal lamp from my bedside table. I didn't know if it would do any good, but it was all I had. My hand shook as I raised it, my knuckles white as I gripped it with all my strength. The figure stopped, its tendrils hovering just inches from my skin. It tilted its head, as if considering me, studying me, and for a moment, the whispers faltered. I took that moment. With a scream that was equal parts terror and defiance, I swung the lamp as hard as I could, smashing it into the figure's outstretched tendrils. The impact sent a shockwave through the room. The figure recoiled, its tendrils snapping back, the darkness around it rippling like disturbed water. For a split second, I thought I'd done it, that I'd hurt it somehow. But then, it was yet in my hands, sent flying across the room, a force that was far beyond I could have mustered. Then, tendrils lashed out, wrapping around my arms and legs, all in sleep like the touch of death itself. I couldn't scream, as it would vibrating through the air, through the very fabric of reality itself. I didn't know where it was coming from, but the figure heard it too. It hesitated, its tendrils loosening their grip on me just slightly. That hesitation was all I needed. With one last, desperate surge of strength, I wrenched myself free from its grasp, stumbling backward, gasping for air. The humming grew louder, filling the room, drowning out the whispers. The figure shuddered, its form flickering, becoming less solid, less real. I looked around, trying to find the source of the sound, but there was nothing, just the hum, vibrating through the walls, through the floor, through me. And then I realized it wasn't coming from outside, it was coming from inside me. It was the same hum I'd heard when I first tried the astral projection, the same resonance that had pulled me out of my body. But this time, it was different. It wasn't pulling me out, it was pulling something else in. The figure shrieked, a high-pitched, keening wail that cut through the air like a knife. It reached for me again, but this time I didn't back away. I stood my ground, the hum resonating through me, giving me strength, giving me power. And then, with a sound like tearing fabric, the figure was pulled backward, its tendrils flailing wildly as it was sucked into the darkness from which it had come. The shadows around it collapsed inward, imploding, until there was nothing left but a faint, lingering whisper. "Join us." And then, silence. The cold lifted, the darkness faded, and I was alone. The room was still, the air warm again, the light from the lamp casting familiar, comforting shadows on the walls. But I knew, deep down, that it wasn't over. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't gone. It had been driven back, but not destroyed. It was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for another chance to pull me, or someone else, into its world. I don't know how much time passed before I finally moved. I was exhausted, drained in every possible way, but I was alive, and more importantly, I was still me. I hadn't given in, hadn't joined it, and that had to count for something. In the days that followed, I slowly started to piece my life back together. I moved out of the apartment, started seeing a therapist, trying to make sense of what had happened, but some things can't be explained away by logic or therapy. Some things are just there, on the edges of reality, waiting to be found. I still hear the hum sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet. It's faint, barely noticeable, but it's there, a reminder of how close I came to losing everything. And sometimes, in the corners of my vision, I catch a glimpse of something moving in the shadows. I don't know what I'll do if it ever comes back. Maybe I'll be stronger, maybe I won't. But for now, all I can do is try to live my life, one day at a time, and hope that the darkness stays away. But if there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that the deep web is no place for curiosity. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed, and some shadows, once invited in, can never be fully banished.